was considered to bring good luck and prosperity to married couples and their children. He also played a vital role in the ritual of childbirth.
Childbirth is always a dangerous time, and so various rites have to be performed. And certain gods are really dedicated to watching over the new mother and the new child, such as Bes. There's also a sense he's the household familiar. He's a bit of a comic character.
The mystical rites that surrounded Bes were also important in warding off evil spirits during childbirth. In the Manchester Museum is a unique Bes mask, which may have been worn during childbirth by a priestess.
This mask may have been worn by a dancer who would have been involved in a ritual, some kind of ritual dance to protect the household and protect the women.
As well as ritual masks, priests would also use magic wands in the process of childbirth.
They were used to maybe draw a circle, protective barrier around the mother and child, doing a ritual like encircling you to ward off evil and to keep goodness in might actually be a very comforting thing for the mother in labour.
Bes is also believed to have a more erotic charge. One theory suggests that he was used to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. A mural has been discovered which shows Bes tattooed on a young Egyptian woman. Tattoos in Egyptian society were almost exclusively drawn on the most erotic parts of the female body.
What we've got here is a New Kingdom fertility figurine. She's got tattoos across her buttocks. There's a line of dots, rather like a belt, also a sign of fertility and sexuality. Another interesting feature is the fact she doesn't have any feet. And the reason for this is so that when she's placed into the tomb, she doesn't run away taking her fertility with her.
Egyptologists believe these statuettes, called brides of the dead, were symbols of fertility and rejuvenation. Strange markings on tattooed mummies have led other scholars to ask if tattoos were used to protect the unborn child. One theory is that dots were tattooed on a woman's abdomen. During childbirth, as the stomach expands, the dots would create a net-like structure, protecting the child. But there is another side to the god Bes.
He's also the patron god of dancing, music, singing, getting drunk, all the sort of fun party aspects.
Another depiction of Bes on the thigh of an Egyptian woman is shown on a blue bowl which dates to 1300 BC. The woman depicted is a musician, which is apt, as sex and music were very much linked. Today, modern belly dancers use coin belts to accentuate the sensuality of the movements, as well as the sounds. And sound would be a key signifier of sex in ancient Egypt.
There are also scenes of music, because music and sexuality go together.
Images of music and dancing would signify another association with the gods. One goddess in particular reveals another side to sex for the ordinary Egyptian. The goddess known as Hathor, the daughter of the sun god Ra, was the most important deity in one's sexual life. She was the goddess of physical love and spiritual love.
There was one object that was particularly important in the cult of Hathor, and that's what's called a sistrum, a sacred rattle, which has a picture of Hathor on it. And whenever anybody rattled and made a noise with such a sistrum, it meant that the goddess was present, she was there.
Could this sound have heralded a sexual act?
We see in many tomb scenes dating as far back as the Old Kingdom, where there are scantily clad women who are dancing and shaking these sistra as part of a ritual celebration.
The coded references on the temple walls between sex and music are mirrored on the Turin erotic papyrus. Via our reconstruction, we have also discovered a sistrum on the papyrus, suggesting that the goddess Hathor is present in the sexual acts being carried out. The gods and their rituals were seen to aid fertility and ultimately the physical act of sex. But how did ordinary ancient Egyptians feel about sex? The Turin erotic papyrus provides a startling glimpse back 3,000 years. Through exploring the daily sex lives of ancient Egypt, can we unlock its graphic images? we know that some sexual images are connected with the gods, and others with the rituals of fertility. But could the Turin erotic papyrus have simply been ancient pornography? To find out, we must first understand what the ordinary Egyptian considered erotic. To do this, we must return to the site where the erotic papyrus may have been discovered. It is an important settlement that was occupied by the workmen who built the Valley of the Kings. Known as Deir el-Medina, it has provided key evidence for unlocking some of the mysteries of ancient sex.
At Deir el-Medina, we get a sense of the smut, we get a sense of the adultery, we get a sense of how people thought and felt about sex.
Sources recovered from the village indicate that as many as 100 individuals lived in the community for much of its history.
Here we are, high above the village of Deir Medina. Over on the other side of the mountain is the Valley of the Kings. And not only do we have the village here, but we also have the tombs of the workers who went to work in the Valley of the Kings to excavate and decorate the tombs.
These construction workers and craftsmen left clues.
These workers were on a 10-day week, so they'd go off and they'd do their jobs, clearly building up a bit of sexual tension over those 10 days, and then come back and release themselves on their women. So what you don't know is whether this is a kind of archaeological record of the actual sex lives of the workers, or whether it's a kind of fantasy of this is the perfect sex that you'd get after that long 10-day week.
The ancient name of the site was Set Mat, the place of truth.
It came into existence in the reign of Amenhotep I, perhaps sometime about 1520, 1510 BC, and it existed for over 400 years.
It is now viewed as a microcosm of Egyptian society.
You would find people who were extraordinarily literate because they were scribes and artists. So compared to other villages all over Egypt, this is a very, very special place.
The site has yielded a wealth of artifacts and texts that provide vital information about the way these people lived and how they viewed sex. This papyrus has survived from the late New Kingdom period in around 1500 BC. It reveals the sexual antics of an artisan. It describes him sleeping with a married woman and her daughter, who is then passed on to his son.
And there is no site which provides as much information on daily life in ancient Egypt as this site does.
The site provides so much lasting archaeological information simply because the area surrounding the Valley of the Kings consists of limestone. This provided the workmen with shards of rock that they could use as sketchbooks.
In Deir Medina have been found lots of flakes of limestone with wonderful drawings on them, which the craftsmen sat and did while they were having their time off when they are not working over in the Valley of the Kings.
Known as ostraca, thousands have been found. They have been proven to be fascinating and important slices of ancient history.
This is a small flake of limestone from the village of Deir el-Medina, and on it there's a doodle, a cartoon, done by the workmen who decorated the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And it shows a man having sex with a woman, and beside it there's a line of hieroglyphs, and she's saying, "Calm now is the desire of my skin." And it seems to be a sort of parody of the religious scenes you see on temple walls.
The craftsmen would use these pieces of rock as sketchbooks for their thoughts which would reflect everyday life.
Some of these drawings also have erotic scenes, people having sexual intercourse, which is a very rare thing in Egyptian art, even in unofficial art. But this is a place where these things would come from.
Just like Egyptian statues, these images were subject to censorship through the ages. Today, only a few remain on display to the public. Hidden in a corner of an old cabinet in the Cairo Museum is a sexual representation that is both shocking and beautiful. After persuading the museum, we were allowed to show this 3,000-year-old sketch on camera.
Here we have some ostraka from Deir el-Medina, from Luxor. And ostraka, it's a Greek word, means like shell or limestone flake. And actually on this ostraka, the ancient Egyptian worker from Deir el-Medina had sketched some of the daily life activities, like showing animals, showing kings, showing, even relationship between men and women. Like this one, for example, it shows a man and woman making love, and it's painted in black ink.
The man is kneeling in front of the lady, and she's wrapping her legs, her thighs, around his neck. This must have been one of the favorite ones because it has been depicted so often. It's beautifully drawn because not all the pornographic drawings are very well drawn, but this one is, from an artistic point of view, it's also very high quality.
We begin to see a more common view of erotica in everyday life. From another image recovered from Deir el-Medina, we see a young woman wearing see-through clothes, a recurring image in Egyptian society.
When they represent women in linen garments, and they wear long linen garments in the New Kingdom, they create the impression that you can see through the linen garments, which of course you couldn't. But high-quality linen will cling to the shape of the body, and they therefore represent the ghost of the body underneath, which again indicates the interest in the female form.
By studying ancient Egyptian love poetry, we can gain a further insight into the type of sexual fantasies that were prevalent in everyday society. These texts reveal the sensual feelings of ancient Egyptians.
Around about 1500 BC, we start to get evidence of this beautiful love poetry that ancient Egyptians would write to one another. The men are all described as kind of superheroes, and the ideal woman emerges wet from the Nile with her clothes clinging to her body.
Bettany Hughes discovers one reference to a fantasy that is just as evocative today.
This is one very good example of a bit of love poetry which came from Deir el-Medina, and it was written about 3,000 years ago. It's a lover who's writing to his girlfriend, and he describes her perfect white breast, that she has fingers like lotus flowers. He says, in her thighs her beauty rests, and when she passes, all men turn their necks to look at her.
All the clues come together to paint a vivid picture of the ultimate ancient Egyptian male fantasy. A beautiful and seductive young woman rising, dripping wet from the sacred River Nile. It's a seductive image we could easily see in a movie or advertisement today.
They were very sensitive, and if the words are anything to go by, then some of them were clearly very skilled lovers too.
So if they had the same sexual appetite as we do, did the ancients also have the same voyeuristic desires? Could the sexually explicit papyrus be the world's first men's magazine? The smoking gun that reveals the truth about sex in ancient Egypt. The Turin Erotic Papyrus is one of the most sexually explicit documents ever recovered from antiquity, yet its true meaning remains a mystery. It's a code that needs to be cracked if we are to understand the truth about the real sex lives of the ancient Egyptians.
The Turin Erotic Papyrus is a document which some Egyptologists get very po-faced about. They're clearly deeply embarrassed about this sort of thing. But the plain fact is that the ancient Egyptian approach to sexuality was a great deal more relaxed than the attitudes that we find in current monotheistic societies.
For much of its history, it's been kept under lock and key. The previous curator at the Egyptian Museum in Turin placed a table in front of the artifact so that no one could stare deep into its surface. We have been afforded unique access to film the papyrus. Historian Bettany Hughes has been fascinated by this artifact and is intrigued to see the object up close. It is a shocking revelation for her.
What I'm looking at is completely unique in the world. There's nothing else like this. And it is a fantastic thing because it's so beautiful, it's so beautifully produced. But then when you get into it and see what the pictures are, this is where it becomes really intriguing, because this is basically Playboy magazine of the ancient world. So there's 12 erotic scenes here where elderly men are having a great time with young, beautiful Egyptian girls.
The severely damaged papyrus has not been treated well by time. Although sections are missing, there is enough fragmentary evidence to allow scholars to fill in this ancient jigsaw puzzle. Using this information, we have restored the papyrus to its original state using computer graphics. This is our depiction of the graphic images that the ancient Egyptians would have seen over 3 millennia ago.
With something like the Turin erotic papyrus, it's very hard to know what it was used for. It certainly wasn't written by peasant farmers. It comes from very literate, sophisticated people. Some modern scholars have thought it's a treatise on the art of lovemaking. Some have suggested that it's a religious text.
On one section of the papyrus are images of animals imitating human behavior, which has left some scholars to believe that the papyrus is meant to be humorous.
So whether this was someone's way of spending the hours in the evening was to sketch this, or whether there was some deeper purpose, we don't really know.
As the images come to life, various scenes are depicted showing sexual positions. One sequence shows a woman having sex on a chariot, a mysterious image to scholars.
And I'm not completely sure what's going on here, because this is a very rare image in ancient Egyptian art, but I think what it probably is the chariot was a real symbol of prestige and power. So probably what you've got is a conflation of sex and violence 3,200 years ago, just as we put the two together today.
The woman's hair is being pulled by the old man. Hair was very erotic in ancient Egypt.
Hair was one of the most erotic things a woman could have in ancient Egypt, especially in the New Kingdom, the 18th and the 19th dynasty. Most Egyptians shaved their heads, so they were bald as a way of getting rid of lice and other such horrible, noxious, crawling things in your hair. So they would wear these very elaborate wigs.
Other Egyptian texts refer to hair. One states, "Put your wig on and let's go to bed."
The idea was that the bigger and more elaborate your wig, the sexier you were. And in some of the 19th dynasty love poetry, they do actually refer to women being so enamored with their loved one that they forget what they're doing and they leave their hair half undone, and it's the equivalent of being caught naked, really, to be caught with your wig only half prepared.
Our ideas of rock and roll hedonism also seem to be present in the papyrus. Young girls servicing aging men while high on drugs.
We see images of scantily clad young ladies involved in the sexual act. On the top of their heads depicted is a lotus flower. Now clearly they aren't wearing these lotus flowers, but the lotus flowers are symbols, and what we learn from seeing these lotus flowers is that these young women are under the influence of the narcotic that could be extracted from the lotus flower. And so what we are to understand by that is that these women are open to enjoying the sexual act.
With evidence of drugs, alcohol, music, and aging men, are we looking at an ancient brothel?
I suspect this is a brothel. I mean, there's a lot of sexual action going on here. It would be hard to imagine this was just a normal night out in Bronze Age Egypt. Interestingly, actually, if this is a brothel, then the prostitutes, of course, wouldn't have been paid in money because there wasn't cash at this time. So they'd have been paid for their services in something like fish or maybe a bushel of wheat.
But what evidence is there of prostitutes in ancient Egypt?
It's very likely prostitutes existed. As they say, it's the oldest profession in the world. We do have snippets of information that could suggest prostitution existed, one being the Turin erotic papyrus, which could be a story of a New Kingdom brothel in Thebes.
Can we answer the burning questions? Who was the papyrus made for? What was it for?
There's a huge debate about what is the significance of the Turin erotic papyrus. We have 12 different positions of intercourse. Some would like to relate it to the world of the gods. Others say that's a Theban priest having a night out in a brothel or something like that. But very likely it's either a piece of early pornography. The clue here is actually the text that's written in between the figures, because that gives scraps of the conversation that the parties are having.
One image shows a woman pleasuring herself on an ancient pot known as an amphora. She paints her lips as she does so. The text next to this picture is still visible.
At first glance, what you see is that she's applying lipstick. She's kind of dabbing it on with a long brush, staring into a mirror, and that in itself was an erotic act in Egypt, because mirrors often had handles in the shape of a beautiful woman. But then, when your eye moves down, you see that it gets really quite pornographically raunchy. That actually this young girl is sitting with her legs wide apart on top of an amphora, which is turned upside down, so the point is inserted inside her. So she's obviously pleasuring herself on this vase, and from the expression on her face, it's working. It's actually very interesting, because what's written here is that she's saying to this old man who's with her in this scene, "You give me nothing, so I've got to resort to this, to the vase, to give her orgasm." And then just down here, you can see it's very fragmentary, it's very broken. You just about read out, she's kind of saying, "Come here, big boy, dirty boy, you kind of sex criminal." He's obviously enjoying this moment because he's got a huge engorged phallus which is resting just next to the amphora.
Ultimately, the evidence suggests the Turin Erotic Papyrus may be the world's oldest men's pornographic magazine.
The artist is representing sexual activity with enormous enthusiasm and with lots of salacious detail. I think that he would be a bit like those characters you used to find in Cairo in the old days, who'd sidle up to you and say, "Hey, mister, you want to see a dirty picture?" I very much like the idea that this is a kind of precursor of Playboy.
We may never determine who precisely created the Turin Erotic Papyrus and for what purpose. What we do know is that 3,000 years later, experts regard it as one of the most important artifacts of antiquity.
The priceless thing about this papyrus is that it allows you to decode real Egyptian sexuality. I mean, this is a way that you can understand how the ancient Egyptians had sex, what they enjoyed doing, and what was just a little bit dangerous and naughty for them.
At the end of our journey, mysteries still remain about sex in ancient Egypt. But by decoding their imagery, we have pieced together a more complete picture. The Turin Erotic Papyrus is a lens. It provides a stunning new view into the civilization that created it, shedding light on their beliefs on the afterlife, rituals of fertility, and attitudes toward erotica. An intimate view of sex in the ancient world.